Almost.
Welcome to the Elk Talk Podcast with Randy Newberg and Corey Jacobson. Presented by the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation.
The goal is what little you and I know about elk hunting, we share with people.
I've got an elk bugling. It's like 120 yards away. What do I do? First off, the thought would never cross my mind when an elk's bugling 120 yards away to call anybody on a cell phone.
All elk?
All the time? Only elk?
Only elk.
Well, it's us having conversations, so we usually go down some rabbit holes, but
If you hunt with Corey Jacobson, you will find the landscape is full of rabbit holes. We're just going to make this up as we go.
and you look at it like, oh, that's a target-rich environment. But if you're trying to single one out, a solo target there is much easier to go into than a big group.
We record everything, so there's no BSing, no lying, no faking it with us.
Did we hit the record button?
I forgot to hit the record button. If you want to know something about elk hunting, this probably isn't the podcast to listen to. Should we give them a list of all the other podcasts where they might learn something? The Elk Talk Podcast is brought to you by the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, ensuring the future of elk, other wildlife, their habitat, and our hunting heritage. To become a member, go to rmef.org.
The Elk Talk Podcast is also brought to you by Mountain Ops, making outdoor energy and performance nutrition to make you a stronger and healthier elk hunter. They have a full line of hunting-related supplements, including meal replacement shakes, multivitamins, pre-workout fuel, and post-workout recovery. And my favorite, their new performance protein bars that, by the way, are packed with 270 calories and 20 grams of protein, but contain less than 6 grams of sugar. Visit mountainops.com to learn more and to order, and be sure to use the promo code ELKTALK to save on your next order.
The podcast is also brought to you by Gerber. Go to gerbergear.com and learn about the knives, the Vital, the Big Game Vital, the Gator Premium, all the things that we use when we're out in the woods, and not just knives, but also some really cool multi-tools that they have.
And we have a promo code for Gerber as well. Just use the code ELKTALK to save 20% on your orders at gerbergear.com. And we are also brought to you by Rocky Mountain Hunting Calls. And Rocky Mountain Hunting Calls is the original designer and inventor of the pallet plate diaphragm that's completely changed the way elk calls are made and used. And to find out more and to order your elk calls, go to RockyMountainHuntingCalls.com or BuglingBull.com and use promo code ELKTALK, and you're going to save 15% on all of your elk calls and elk call accessories.
The Elk Talk Podcast is also brought to you by GoHunt.com. Go to GoHunt.com and sign up for the Insider. The Insider is changing how hunts and hunting information are found. No doubt about that. Use promo code ELKTALK, and when you sign up for the Insider, you're going to get $50 of store credit, mad money, in their gear shop.
Lastly, the University of Elk Hunting online course is a proud partner of the Elk Talk Podcast. And within the University of Elk Hunting online course, you're going to find nearly 60 chapters organized in 17 modules of elk hunting instruction aimed at making you a more successful elk hunter. From planning and e-scouting to calling strategies and packing, every imaginable elk hunting topic is included in the online course. And regardless of your previous elk hunting experience or success, I'm confident the University of Elk Hunting online course will make you a more confident, more successful elk hunter. Just visit elk101.com and use the promo code ELKTALK to save 20% when you sign up for a membership to the University of Elk Hunting online course.
And with that, Corey, we are ready to get into it.
Let's jump into it.
Hey, Corey, how you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. I'm sitting in the back seat of my Ford Raptor as my camera crew is checking to see if it can do 90 on the interstate. We're somewhere between Idaho Falls and Twin Falls, and I have one of the camera guys driving my truck, and the sagebrush is going by so fast that I can hardly even identify it as sagebrush.
Wow. So if anything happens to the truck, you've got the cameraman there to blame.
Yeah, blame. I always blame the camera guy. If they get speeding tickets, I'm not paying for it.
Exactly.
Not me. I drive like Mr. Magoo. I put it whatever the speed limit is. I'm 2 miles an hour below the speed limit. Put it on cruise, and off we go. And if somebody gets mad, I'm not going fast enough. Well, it's not my fault they didn't get up in the morning.
Yep.
If you can't get the mattress off your back in the morning, that's not my problem. So,
well, this is a first for us. We are recording the podcast remotely, which is not new, but you are mobile. This is our first time. Yeah, I think that we've recorded it with you in a truck driving down the freeway. Yeah,
this will be a first for that. I'm on my way to Nevada for an archery mule deer hunt, and I don't know why I do this. Every time I go to Nevada, I complain that it's too hot. I get dehydrated. I'm always hunting a fifth choice or leftover tag, so there's a reason that you can draw it as your fifth choice or get it as a leftover. But I just like hanging out in Nevada. There's nobody there.
Well, there's a reason for that probably.
Yeah, there's a reason why there's nobody there hunting.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, but you know what's going to happen? I'm going to go there with a mule deer tag, and I'm going to see all these elk probably.
Exactly. Yeah. That's what's weird about Nevada is their elk season is pretty much the same time as their early mule deer season. It opens August 15th, I think, in most of the units for archery, and then it closes at the end of August. So you don't even, we complain about Utah's season, but Nevada's even worse as far as being able to hunt the rut.
Yeah, unless you're into spot and stock elk hunting. I know there's a couple units now where they've moved the archery season into September, but you got to be the governor or some Hollywood celebrity to draw that tag. So that rules me and you out of the. I better not say that. My friends in Nevada will be calling me saying, "Hey, don't be That's how rumors get started." So. No, you just need to be really lucky or have a lot of points. So I'm neither. So, do you have Nevada points?
I have a handful. I think I'm up to 4 or 5 now. So.
Oh man, you're way out in front, man.
Oh yeah,
you'll probably draw next year.
Well, there are people that do. That is the nice thing about bonus points over preference points is. Even though they're squared and somebody with 20 points has 400 chances and I get my 16 or 25, but there's always a chance if your name's in the hat.
Yeah, isn't there some movie where the guy says, "So you're saying there's a chance?"
Dumb and Dumber.
Oh, okay. I've not watched the movie. Someone showed me a clip of it one time. So,
yeah.
But isn't Donnie your sidekick? He's from Ely, Nevada, isn't he?
He is, yeah. He grew up in Ely, and he knows that country pretty well. But I think when he was there, it was before the elk had really started taking off.
Yeah.
And by the time he moved, I guess by the time the elk started picking up there and in that country, he had moved.
Yeah. Well, the spot that I'm going to has a lot of elk, thanks to the Elk Foundation. When they did that reintroduction there, they made a deal with the public land grazing ranchers where they said, we'll buy this ranch that didn't have much deeded acreage, but it had a big grazing allotment. And we will kind of slice and dice the allotment and give it to the other public land grazers so that it'll take some pressure off the forage if elk start competing for forage. So with that deal in place, that's how elk in this part of Nevada were able to get introduced.
Wow.
And now they're all over the place. They migrate into Idaho, all kinds of stuff.
Yeah. If you look at some of the statistics and the demographics of the Nevada herds, they're pretty impressive with the bull to cow ratio and the overpopulation, over objective in most of the units. They're doing a good job of managing. On the flip side, though, it's really, really hard to get a tag.
Yeah. Well, I'm hoping that I don't just get completely distracted by elk, that I find a little forky horn mule deer buck that wants to be. But my freezer's empty. So very seldom is my freezer completely empty on the opening day of deer season, of archery season, but it is this year. So if I send you a picture and it's just a little spike with a little fuzzy knob on his head, don't be heckling me.
You know I won't.
Okay. So, when we were talking about what we want to do for this podcast, it's a little bit of our own personal experience, and then also some experience or some feedback from the questions we always get, where there's a ton of questions about equipment and gear, and does anyone make this, or where do you find that, or I see you modify this, blah, 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 blah. And you and I have both had the blessing of being able to work with companies where we start with an idea and end up with a finished product. And I thought it'd be cool just kind of give the audience an idea of how that works.
Yeah.
If you're open to that idea, you've been doing this way longer than I have, as far as putting products out there with your name on it. How long have you had the Elk 101 series from Rocky Mountain Hunting Calls?
Man, I don't know. Probably 6 years? 7 years?
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, well, you could do this podcast in your sleep then.
No, I mean, it is, and I think that all of these products that we're going to talk about and kind of the concept in general, they all stem from a specific need. We see a way to make something better, or we see a gap in the gear that we use, and we say, what if we had that? That would make it a lot more comfortable or convenient, or whatever it is. I think there's always a need, and it's pretty awesome to be able to recognize that need, but then to be able to take an idea of how to fill that gap or how to meet that need, and to have companies that are open to those ideas and excited to be able to manufacture them and implement them, and then for us to be able to use them in the field.
Yeah, for me, I've always just bought whatever was available. And very often, the stuff I end up using was made by a company. Its intended use was mostly for deer hunting, and somehow I got to figure out how to adapt it to elk hunting. And so, since I started working on this knife project with Gerber, where they said, let's build something specific for elk hunters, I wanted to. I guess I started looking at it differently of, all right, what else is out there that was built specifically for elk hunters rather than just general hunting or deer hunting, and you elk hunters figure out a way to make this work. And so that's kind of some of the ideas that were bouncing around my head when I read all the viewer questions or listener questions. One of the ones you'd mentioned was how Sitka Gear started. Was just there was no performance clothing in the outdoor space. It was
and I remember those days of literally going to Walmart, finding a T-shirt for $9.99 and a pair of pants for $14.99 that were made out of cotton, and wearing them. And I can remember stepping over, downfalls and a staub sticking up, and I jabbed that staub into the knee of the pants, and it rips them clear down to the bottom of the pant leg. Shirts, the nice thing about shirts is most of my camo shirts had the sleeves cut off or the pocket ripped off. And
was that for toilet paper?
To do that. Exactly.
Was that because you forgot your toilet paper, huh?
That's exactly what it was. But you can afford to do that when you're using a $9 T-shirt. You don't feel bad about it.
Yeah.
But, and I think we just made do. And as elk hunters, we're sweating like crazy. We're going up the mountain. We're napping up on the mountain during the middle of the day when it cools down. We're out after dark. And we said, well, there's nothing else available. And I think there was a handful of hunters that we always probably called them yuppie hunters back then. Now we look at them and think, man, they were so much smarter than we were. But they were using mountaineering gear. They were buying gear in solid colors and hunting in it. And they're probably the same people that were using, the trekking poles, the hippie sticks, or whatever we called them back then. And we sat there and laughed at them. And now we've literally followed them. They were 20 years ahead of us. And Sitka gear was started because elk hunters were tired of hunting in cotton. We saw that mountaineering gear was exactly what we needed, but it just wasn't in camouflage. And Jonathan and Jason at the time started Sitka gear because of that need. And it's amazing to look at what the clothing industry, the hunting clothing industry, has moved to. Now I don't know if you probably still can find cotton camouflage clothing, but I couldn't imagine buying it and hunting in it.
Yeah, now I think about spending 100 days a year up in the hills from August hot to December cold, and I would not want to go back to doing it in the old stuff that I used to wear.
No.
That would create a level of misery that at my softness of older age, I wouldn't be able to tolerate.
Yep. It changes. When you finally get it, you look back and you think, wow, how did we do it before? And we did it before. I mean, there were wool jackets, there were things that we did and that we used to get by. But when you start breaking it down, it's like, am I just getting by, or is gear actually contributing to my success? And it's pretty amazing. If you and I were to list out all the gear we use, most of it's contributing to our success in some way. And it's, you and I think we've talked a lot that, don't go out and spend a whole bunch of money on gear if you aren't in shape, or if you don't understand elk's needs. Invest in yourself first and then start adding to your gear list. But there's so many options now that are specific to elk hunters that do contribute to success.
Yeah. When you did the movie or the film, The Linguist, you interviewed your dad, Wayne Carlton, Will Primos, and Larry Jones, right?
Yep.
Are those? And
that's 4.
Yeah, that was kind of the start of elk specific calls, because if I remember right, weren't most of the early diaphragm calls just turkey calls that somebody tried to figure out how to make it sound like an elk?
Yeah, I think we credit Wayne Carlton for that he was a turkey hunter from back east, and he came out and heard an elk bugle, and he thought, I bet you can manipulate that turkey diaphragm to make a sound that's similar to an elk. And so that's what he did. He came out the next year and he had a turkey diaphragm, and, he used it to try to mimic an elk. And then from there, he and Larry Jones kind of about the same time started building elk specific diaphragms. And there is quite a bit of a difference in those two. And we hear it all the time. A lot of the people that you and I interact with on the educational side are coming from back east or from a turkey or whitetail background, and they want to hunt elk. And it's interesting, people will say, I grew up turkey hunting, so diaphragms aren't anything new to me. I've got that, I'll be able to pick that up really quickly. And most of them struggle quite a bit because it's completely different. The diaphragm construction's different, the way that you use it is different. And you can develop a lot of bad habits if you put an elk diaphragm in and start trying to use it the way you would use a turkey diaphragm.
Yeah. Well, I must have picked up some of those bad habits then. But no, you just think about how much trial and error, prototyping, entrepreneurial engineering went into what we take for granted today. I mean, you have told me before about growing up, helping your dad build elk calls in the living room.
Yeah, and I didn't help build them. I was just the guinea pig, and I probably have had more elk call parts in my mouth with Bondo on them and sitting there with a file and a piece of Bondo and just continuing to file it down until it works. And, and it's amazing because we're still developing new things, new and improved things. There are advancements in material that come out. There are advancements in just engineering and other ideas. And you look back and think, okay, diaphragm elk calls were, early 80s to mid 80s when they really started. And, my dad is credited for developing the diaphragm elk call with the backing plate on it. And he got the patent on that. And, it really did change how diaphragm elk calls were made. It changed how easy they were to use. It changed how long they lasted. A lot of advancements. But even from there, he developed that in the early 90s, I think. And so now here we are 25 years later and still improving on that and finding different latexes that last longer. One of the diaphragms, the contender in the Elk 101 series, Kurt, who at the time was the general manager of Rocky Mountain Hunting Calls, built me over 100 diaphragms, all on the same frame, just with different latex thicknesses and different latex stretches. We literally built out a matrix of different stretches and thicknesses on latex. And I went through, I think there were 120 of them. I went through each of those diaphragms. Wow. And, I'd toss the one that wouldn't work. And I ended up with 10 or 12 that are like, these are really close. And then we kept dialing down from there and narrowing it down and finding the latex that I felt was optimal, with the idea of making it last a long time. And from that, that's one diaphragm call. And from that, we found a lot of other attributes to the latex that we were able to make more improvements to other calls, as well as come up with some new calls. So, there's a lot that goes into it.
How many seasons or how long of a period of time did that last while you were prototyping and experimenting?
It took probably 4 to 6 months of me calling Kurt and saying, hey, this one doesn't work, but we're close. Can we try this? And, Kurt, to his credit, he was wide open to anything. He's like, you tell me what you want. I will go and find new latex suppliers. I will find different colors of tape if you want a different color diaphragm. We just went through all these different options, and it's awesome to work with someone like that that's just so open to your input and your ideas. And I think that's really how cool products get developed. Is you've got to be open, you've got to think outside the box, and you've got to try things that maybe haven't been tried before.
Yeah, I don't think you can be afraid to fail. Because if you're afraid to fail, you're never going to push the boundaries of where success might be hiding.
Yep.
But so that's diaphragms, but then even you look at bugle tubes. I mean, we all started with just what was, a little piece of flexible plastic to start with, and now you look at the shape and the sounds that they can make and how you can do different things with them. All that stuff I think we take for granted today because we go online and it's available to us. It'll be in our mailbox in 2 days, but an awful lot of work and thought and idea has went into it, specifically from an elk hunter.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think back in the mid 80s, early 90s, the vacuum cleaner hose was kind of the standard elk call. You just find your wife's old vacuum cleaner and cut off about 16 or 18 inches of the hose on it, and she'll never miss that. And we've got us a bugle tube, and it sounded like what you'd expect it to sound like. Just you couldn't get a lot of tone out of it, you couldn't get a lot of volume out of it, and it's just cool because my dad, he was a tinker. He would sit there with Bondo and super glue and stick stuff together. And I remember a prototype elk bugle that he had probably, again, late 80s, early 90s, where he had probably a 6 or 8 inch section of vacuum cleaner hose at the top. And then he had got, I don't know if you remember, I don't even remember what they were called, but it was some kind of a squeeze-it bottle. It had like Kool-Aid in it, and you could freeze it, I think, and you twist the top off. They were like a kid's drink. And they had grooved sides in the bottle. It was kind of like a miniature Coke bottle, but it was plastic, and it had little grooves in the side. So he'd cut the ends off of that and glued that to the end of the vacuum hose. And then he took a shampoo bottle that was bigger at the bottom and narrowed to the top, cut the top and bottom off of that, and it kind of had a bell-shaped housing at the end, and he glued that on the end. And, had this, just you look at it, and the original one, it was, literally hot glued, super glued, bondoed, and then the mouthpiece had to be expanded, and the end of it, had to just have the right size opening. And, did all that. And then we realized you could just buy a wiffle ball bat, one of the Fat Boy wiffle ball bats, and cut the ends off of that. And man, that made an incredible elk bugle. And that's literally how, like the Bully Bull Extreme that we have now, which I think is just the absolute best sounding bugle. That's how it was developed, from a wiffle ball bat.
Come here, son. Give me that wiffle ball bat.
I'm sure people looked at me funny when I had, 6 different wiffle ball bats going through the checkout line of different sizes and shapes. And I had more wiffle balls at home growing up than anybody knew what to do with.
Well, and look where it is now. It's one of the best-selling elk bugles out there, I'm sure.
Yep.
Speaking of which,
and there's a lot that goes into it, I mean, you look at a bugle tube and it's like, well, it's just, you need something to broadcast that call, but having the right size opening at the bottom helps control the back pressure, which helps control the diaphragm use. Having the neck the right size on it, so it necks down and then opens up into the chamber at the bottom, is super important. So you get the right airflow down through that. And so all these things, being able to hit the high note and hold the high note, and being able to use the diaphragm and make it easier to use, is all, the features of the bugle tube contribute to all of those things in using the diaphragm.
So what you're saying is, the guy he now heard what you said. He's going to his kid's play box, and he's going to cut the ends off the wiffle ball bat and say, "There, I just saved some money." He's not going to get quite the quality and the manipulation that he would in a diaphragm or a bugle tube that's been made specifically for a diaphragm call.
Totally. And they work, and we used them forever. I've got pictures from the mid-90s of me with a orange wiffle ball bat with camouflage tape on it, and it worked. But you get, the plastic isn't right, so you get the plastic vibration, so it sounds plasticky.
Yeah.
Then you can't get the neck just right. There's some things that have been improved upon, again, specific for its intended use.
Yeah. So this experiment that you're in year 6 or 7 with Rocky Mountain hunting calls, the listener can go and buy those calls out at RockyMountainHuntingCalls.com, right?
Yeah. And if they use the promo code Elk Talk, they save.
What, 15%?
15% on all their elk calls.
Wow. I have a saying anymore that I don't want anyone to pay full retail. So that's why I'm big into promo codes. Yep. I don't like people paying full retail. If they can save 10 or 15% on everything they buy, that might be one extra tag they can buy this year.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think hunters especially are very keen to discounts, and I fall right into that category. I don't like to pay full retail if I don't have to.
Yeah. So there's a lot of ways that I think of how elk hunting, just like you were saying earlier, go out, you use something, and after a season you say there's got to be a better way. There's got to be a different way. And with enough tinkering and companies that are interested in providing better solutions, pretty soon, here comes one of those ideas or solutions that hopefully is helpful to elk hunters.
Yeah.
Well,
you look back at, pictures of my grandpa. He's wearing jeans. He's wearing his logging boots. He's wearing a heavy wool coat. He's got a hatchet in a hatchet holster on his belt. He's got a saw and a knife and a big sharpening stone. And I'm looking at that saying, that's got to be 4 or 5 pounds of gear that he's carrying just to break down an elk. And, and there's still people that say, well, you have to have a hatchet or you have to have a bone saw. That's the only way you can process it. And, I think you and I have learned that you don't have to have all that.
Yeah. If I try to think about how many elk I've done the gutless method on, that I've shot, my family has shot, our guest hunters have shot, it's a lot, and I've never used a saw on any of them. But I was with that mindset when I first started elk hunting. I thought, well, I got to split the pelvic bone. I got to figure out how I'm going to saw the head off. So I walked around with all that stuff. Fortunately, I didn't kill many elk, so I didn't have to. I didn't have to use all that stuff and create sharp edges on bones that would cut me. But
exactly.
But no,
speaking of the gutless method, you can break down the whole elk just simply by carving the meat away from that pelvic bone.
Yep.
You still have to cut through the ligaments at the knee joints. You still have to cut through the ligaments at the neck and everything, which requires sometimes a little bit more pressure and a specific tool again for elk hunting is handy.
Yeah, and that's kind of what was the genesis of my project with Gerber. Is I come from a trapping background, and trappers are really snobs about their knives and the edge and how everything's just got to be a certain way. Well, what I found out when I was elk hunting, doing the gutless method and other stuff, is there's a lot of parts of an elk that are really tough on a knife. The reason that my blades were not lasting very long, or why I had to stop and resharpen all the time, was that you start cutting on a hawk where there's tendon and bone. Well, tendon and bone is not favorable to any sharp edge. I don't care what quality of steel you use. And then you start doing the really thick leather where you're making the dorsal cut or something like that, or you're trying to remove the head at the atlas joint. And I mean, the list goes on and on of all these things that elk really are tough on the cutting surface of your blade. And the integrity of your blade is paramount to being able to do what you need to do efficiently. So I was at Gerber, and Andrew, who was the president at the time, said, what's the worst thing about working on an elk? So I walked through all these parts of what really made it tough. And he asked me, he said, well, why doesn't anyone have that? I said, well, that's what I've been asking all the knife companies. Why doesn't anyone have that? And so he said, well, will you help us build that? I said, yeah, sure. So May of 2017, 3 years ago, they flew me out to their plant in Oregon, and for 3 years, they pretty much gave me the disposal of their designers and their engineering team. And I went through kind of the process you were talking about with the calls. We went and took every knife they had, every knife their competitors had. We went down to a Cabela's store nearby, and we bought a whole shopping cart full of knives. And they had me bring them back to where all their engineers were in this room. And we went through every one of them, and I'm like, that's no good because of this. I don't want that because of that, da-da-da. And through a lot of prototyping. Did you know that they can 3D print a knife? They sent me 3D prints. Like, they print them on a 3D printer to determine all the ergonomics. I'm like,
Wow.
yeah. So it was just an incredible process. And I think engineers and accountants aren't, don't take this the wrong way, Corey, because I know you're an engineer, but I think engineers look at accountants as though they are the most particular SOBs on the planet. When really, I'm not that particular, except when it comes to gear. Then I'm like this nitpicking accountant. So we started the idea that we were just going to have an exchangeable blade system that would be really, really strong, because most of the exchange blade systems I've used, and I've used them all, did not withstand the forces that you sometimes put on those scalpel blades when you're doing an elk. Especially if you're getting in between on the knee joints and you're digging down in there to cut some of those tendons, or if you're doing the atlas joint at the head. There was a whole list of things where it was hard. And so they would send me these exchange blade systems, and we kept working about what type of blades, what type of handles, all this stuff. That process took the better part of a year. And then they asked me, they said, do you think we could do something similar on the same principle with a folding knife? And I said, well, we can, but we got to make sure that we have a tool or something else that protects the integrity of the main cutting blade. So I'd like to take credit for it, but their engineers are the ones who came up with this. They call it a tendon tool. And really what it is, it's a super hard steel, super sharp, with a chiseled and beveled serrated edge to it that you can get in there and remove the hide around the burr of an antler, do the atlas joint, do the tendons. You can do those so quick with that tendon tool, and you're not dulling up your main cutting blade in the process. So once we started working on that, it kind of had the same parallel to the exchangeable, we call it EBS, exchange blade system, how that has a serrated blade and then two other traditional cutting blades. The idea is use the serrated blade for all the things that will ruin the edge of your knife, and then you get way more longevity out of your knife, and you're not going to cut yourself with a dull knife. I've read some stat somewhere that most cuts are made with a dull knife rather than a sharp knife. I don't know if that's true or not. But
well, no, and you just look at, I've been guilty of it myself. If you have a dull knife, you force it, you pry, you dig in and push it and try to get leverage, and you aren't using it the right way. And a lot of times you end up pulling towards yourself or pushing harder. And then when it does slip, you've got way more force behind it. And I've seen some pretty nasty things happen with the knife, trying to use it inappropriately, which usually means it's dull.
Yeah. So that was the idea with both of these, is let's have a blade that does I call it the dirty work, the bones, the tendons, the really thick leather, the muddy hide, the burr at the antler, the atlas joint, and let's abuse the serrated blade or the tendon tool for that. And then your cutting blade should last at least 3 elk. That was our design, was, all right, it's got to last for at least 3 elk. And so that's a function of blade angle, what type of steel, what type of treatment to it. I had no idea there was that much science that went into all this stuff. And they would send me, I don't know how many prototypes, but baskets of them I had at home, and like just the brittleness, or lack of brittleness, we were trying to find that in between. And I'd take the blade and I'd tap it on the antler of elk to see if I could chip the blade, to see if it was too brittle. And every once in a while, it's like, yeah, that's got a really great edge to it, but guess what? It's too brittle. I'd send it back. And their engineers are probably thinking, what does this guy do? Take them and put them in a vise and hit them with a hammer or something? But so we ended up finding these sweet spots. And there's a couple things on there that people will notice is I hate having a pocket clip on my hunting knife because it digs into the palm of my hand. And the first thing I told the engineers or I told the whole team is, if you guys put a pocket clip on this, I'm out of here. Because so many times after a couple hours working on an elk, that pocket clip is augering into your palm of your hand. And so I asked them, I said, why does every hunting knife on the shelf at Cabela's or Bass Pro or Sportsman's, why do they all have pocket clips? And the engineer said, you'll have to ask the sales team about that. So I asked the sales guys, and they said, because the buyers at the big box stores demand a pocket clip on every knife. Not because it has any utility, not because it creates any value. It's because the buyers who buy the knives at the big box stores want a pocket clip. And in my head, I'm thinking, I wonder how many gutless method done elk those guys have done. But I didn't ask.
None. They probably have the belt loop on their hatchet scabbard as well.
Yeah. So I don't want to pick on the buyers of the big box stores, but for me, that when I asked that right up front, it kind of gave me a bit of a revelation of, you know what? There's a lot of things that we end up buying as hunters that probably have no practical purpose to some feature on the end product. And I don't want that. I told them, I do not want a pocket clip. And so they're like, all right, it won't have a pocket clip, because then it can be ambidextrous then, and there's all kinds of benefits. Plus it saves like 40 or 50 cents, which, not that anyone's going to worry about 40 or 50 cents, but I don't know. And then the other thing is, I told them, I am tired of losing my knives up on the mountain. Even though they're orange, at night, I lay it down and I still can't see it. So Gerber does some stuff for the military with this retroreflective tape kind of looking stuff. That's a real technical term, isn't it? Tape kind of looking stuff. Yeah, that's an accountant's that's accountant version of engineering language there. So it's retroreflective, where not only does it reflect the headlamp, but it reflects it back to the source of the light. So I've been going to all these trade shows and all this, talking, doing interviews with knife writers and stuff. And I think of all the work we put into that, the one that seems to be the most common response of, why didn't anyone think of that before, is the retroreflective tape. So I'm thinking by next year, every knife company out there is going to have some sort of retroreflective tape on their knife. And I wish I could take credit for it. I just said I want something like that. But again, the Gerber engineers are the ones who came up with the idea. So, but it was a fun thing to do. I've often wondered, and I think both you and I interact with enough people where we always hear the guy or gal who says, I've got this great idea, so I'm going to get rich with this someday. But an idea to an end product there's a whole lot of distance, a whole lot of mileage to cover between the idea and getting it to an end product.
Yeah.
I didn't appreciate how much work went into it.
Well, and you get an idea, and I think for a lot of people that don't have maybe an engineering or manufacturing background, a lot of those ideas can't physically be manufactured. They just can't be done. And I think that's what ends up stopping a lot of great ideas is, to manufacture, especially on a mass production scale, they can't be done. But with that being said, I think that's what becomes really fun, is to take an idea that can't be done and find a way to do it or do something similar to it. And that's what's fun, is when you get to work with somebody that's open to that, and they don't come back and just say, that can't be done. They say, it can't be done the way we're used to doing it, so we're going to have to find another way to do it And I think that's where these ideas, the creative ideas, become really exciting to work on.
Yeah. So they went the first week I was there. I think I was there 3 or 4 days. They had all these different use cases for an elk hunter and what they use their knife for. What were the problems? What would we try to solve? And by the time we got done, the number of things I wanted solved, I didn't realize I had that many problems with elk hunting knives. It's like, man, I'm a sniveler. And so I told them, I said, well, if you can solve all those problems, this knife is going to cost $500. They said, well, that's our, we got to solve that problem. You don't worry about that. You tell us I don't care if it's a big problem or what you think is a little problem. Let's get it on the board here and let's solve every one of them if we can. And so after I told them the $500, they said, well, we got to keep it under $200 to be in the ballpark that anyone would want to buy it. And then they come up. Then when it's all done this spring, they tell me, yeah, we're going to retail it for $60. I'm like, $60? That's like something you get in a Cracker Jack box, man. Come on. But, oh, well.
Yep.
That's how it goes.
Well, and I'm sitting here. You were kind enough to have Gerber send me each of these. And I know you've been working on this for a long time because you told me.
Yeah.
It's been 1.5 years, 2 years ago, something like that you were working on an elk hunting knife with Gerber, and I kept begging to see it, and you kept saying, well, we don't even have prototypes yet. We're still in, coming up with all these ideas and everything. But I think, for me, I've always used the exchangeable blades. The Gerber Vital has been kind of my go-to just because you always have a sharp blade. You're able to, it's inexpensive to just grab a new blade and put it on there. And so that's been my tool. But now looking at the EBS, the exchangeable blade system that you developed with Gerber, I've got it right here, and it's same concept. It's really similar in concept to like the Gerber Vital big game knife. But the cool part, other than the design, the handle and everything feels great, but it comes with 3 blades that are specific to, like you've been talking about, different needs. And for me, I can use the Gerber Vital to do a whole elk, but those little thin blades, when you get in and start digging into the ligament or trying to force it up the neck of the elk, if you're caping it, they just aren't ideal. They're far from ideal. No. And I usually end up breaking a blade or two if I have to do that and if I force it. So with this system, it comes in a handy little pack. The knife snaps right onto the pack. You have the blades right there. It solves all of those problems. So I'm super excited to put that to use.
Yeah, well, if you cut yourself, don't call me. But no, one of the ideas behind that was I told these guys, and this gets back to our comment about gear designed for deer hunters and elk hunters trying to make it work. I told them how much force sometimes you have to put on a knife blade for elk, and why the Gerber, the Little Vital, and why the Havalons and the others, they just break. They break a lot when you're doing elk, where they won't when you're doing deer, because everything is a mini scale, tougher, thicker, demands even more sharpness. So if someone can put lateral force on those blades on that EBS and break it, they're tougher than I am, which, well, that's not saying much. I drive a desk for a living, but the odds are you're going to put all the pressure you want on those blades, and you're never going to break them. And if one of them gets dull, you can run it through a pull-through sharpener, and you'll be back in business. So they're replaceable blades, not disposable blades.
Yep.
So that was another one of the things, and you can tell just by their thickness, by their length, they're designed for elk, not deer. And so they sent me all different versions of those also. Longer, shorter, thicker, fatter, you name it. And so I guess we'll see. Maybe people say, you know what, Newberg, you don't have a clue what you're doing, man. You just ruined the Gerber in the course of one project. You ruined the brand name of Gerber. Congratulations.
I don't
doubt it.
Worry about that. Yeah.
But
so
enough about.
You mentioned discounts and promo codes.
Yeah.
I'm guessing that the Gerber promo code applies to these new knives as well.
It does. You get 20% off if you go to gerbergear.com and you use Elk Talk as the promo code.
Man, that's a heck of a deal.
20% off. Yeah, so now all of a sudden this $60 knife is $48.
Yep.
I mean, you need to buy 3 of them at that price just because. And let's see. Through August 19th, Gerber's been given 10% of the proceeds to RMEF also.
Wow.
So, yeah. So, anyhow, hopefully people will go there and let me know what they think. And they'll probably say, Newberg, just shut down your engineering ideas right now, pal. Stick to accounting.
I don't think so.
So, moving on from product right now, you seeing these pictures of these elk rubbing the velvet like I am the last few days?
Yeah, I've seen some pictures on Instagram of some fresh rubs, and we spent quite a bit of time this past week. We did a little family vacation and went up to some of my old stomping grounds. It's definitely in elk country, and I didn't see any fresh rubs. But again, I wasn't looking specifically for it. But we're at that time of year.
Yeah, hard to believe that we are, well, a whole nother cycle. Elk have grown their antlers. They're shedding the velvet. And when's your first elk hunt? Late August?
Yeah, we're gonna hunt
September.
Yeah, we're gonna hunt the opener in Idaho, which is August 30th, and that's the date Donnie shot his bull last year here in Idaho. And we're it opens on a Sunday this year, so we're going to have a couple days before that we're going to be able to scout and hopefully have a couple bulls located. They're still going to be, my guess is they're going to be off by themselves, probably not with the herds for the most part, although last year Donnie's bull was with cows. But if we can I love hunting bulls if you can get them located, if they'll bugle just once or twice, in that early season, I love slipping in and getting them fired up. So, it's going to be hot weather. It's going to be long days, but I'm excited.
Okay. Can we expand on that? Because going through all of our listener questions, we've had a bunch of them about early season setups and tactics. So from what I gathered, what you just said there, if you can get a bull to respond in, say, September 1st, you get as close as possible, and you just, even though he may not have cows, you're just trying to get him in the moment or get him worked up.
Yeah, so those, and I think maybe stepping back a little, we talked about the cycle. We've gone through a cycle. They've grown their antlers. They've shed their antlers, grown their antlers. Now they're shedding the velvet off of it. Bulls will spend the summer together in bachelor groups, and they're typically at higher elevations than where you'll find the cows throughout the summer. And they tolerate each other, and you'll find anywhere from 2 to 15 or 18 bulls together during the summer. And they keep their distance. They absolutely have a pecking order, and they know which bulls are the dominant bulls even during that time, but they tolerate each other. But about the first part of August, they start getting ready for the rut, and they get some more testosterone pumping. They've got to get their neck built up to be able to fight. They rub the velvet off of their antlers, and I think that's kind of that first, when they start rubbing the velvet off of their antlers, that tells me they've triggered the pre-rut. They're getting more testosterone, and they don't tolerate each other. They don't want to be around each other. They They realize these are my enemies now. And so they move off into what I call staging areas. And it's just each bull will go off by themselves. And sometimes, the raghorns, the smaller bulls, they'll still stick together. They aren't into that mode yet. But most of your more mature bulls, about the 1st to the 10th of August, are going to start moving off by themselves. And when they do that, they get in these little pockets and they don't move. They've got food, water. It's usually on a north face on a bench, and they will sit there and they will rub 20 or 30 different trees over the course of the next 10 to 20 days in that little pocket. And during this time, they aren't concerned about finding cows. They want to be left alone, and they're just getting ready for the rut. And if I can find a bull in his staging area, in his bedroom, I get excited because he's not been harassed all summer. He hasn't had other hunters pushing him around. His guard's kind of down. He doesn't have cows, but he's kind of interested in cows. But the really cool part is he does not want the company of another bull. He does not want another bull around. And so if I can get that bull just to fire off, just let out a bedded little weak, whiny bugle, or a couple chuckles, or even just a groan, I can move in close and I can get him to do that again. If he'll do it once on August 30th, he'll do it again. And it might take 20 or 30 minutes of me sitting there cow calling. But I'm trying to get him to talk at that point. I'm trying to be within 200 yards of him. And if he'll talk and I hammer him with a challenge bugle, it is the absolute most efficient time of year to get that bull to just lose his mind and come in to fight. He does not want you near him. And I've had some crazy aggressive encounters during those last few days of August through about the 5th of September, if I can find those bulls in their staging area.
So I'm going to follow up with some more of the questions we get then. People are asking, do you bugle then? Are you cow calling? It sounds like you're doing whatever it takes to get him to respond.
Yep. And so, it takes a lot more patience. It's not just a matter of me being mobile now and getting on a ridge and bugling and giving it 90 seconds and then moving to the next vantage point. If I think there's a bull there, if I have trail cameras out that tell me there's a bull there, if I found bulls there on previous years during the pre-rut, I'm going to go back to those areas and I'm going to be super patient. I might stand there for 20 minutes, giving out a couple cow calls, giving out a location bugle, giving out a whine. And then if I get a response when I move in and I can't get another response, I'll sit right there knowing that bull did not move. If he hasn't winded me, he's right there. He's just sitting there quiet. And so I'll do the same thing. I will cow call. I'll give out a little whiny bugle. I'll rake a tree. And raking a tree, and you have to be super aware because a lot of times those bulls will come sneaking in. And we've had it happen in that early season where they literally will come in. They'll take 10 steps and they'll stand there for 10 minutes. And then they'll take 10 more steps and they'll stand there for 10 minutes. And it sometimes takes 30 or 40 minutes. But if you hear a branch pop, if you hear a couple footsteps, if you hear brush breaking, he's on his way. And you have to just be super aware of what the wind's doing. You have to be set up in a good position. You have to be watching for movement because they're coming in wary. Maybe we didn't trip the trigger on him and he's not ready to fight and he's coming in silent.
Yeah.
But we've shot multiple bulls during that first week of season here in Idaho with them coming in silent or with us tripping that trigger and them coming in as aggressive as they would 3 weeks later.
Wow. So obviously it's always helpful to have a caller and a shooter no matter what time of year. But if they're coming in silent, like you're explaining, that's really helpful then to have a shooter out in front of you.
Definitely. And paying attention, because if they do come in silent, they're typically going to circle around and get the wind in their favor before they come in. So making sure that shooter is set up on the downwind side of the caller is going to be really important.
Yeah. And then if you trip his trigger and he responds, what do you do once he responds? You just lay it right back at him?
Yep. Yeah, and that's a lot of people, because you don't hear much bugling that first week of September. You just, there's not as many elk that are fired up. They aren't as vocal, especially on their own. It's hotter, so a lot of times they're bedded down and they just aren't aggressive in their bugling. But if you can get in close, especially on a bigger, mature bull, when you challenge him, it's an automatic reaction. His eyes roll back and he gets up and he doesn't even know why he's doing it. His feet are just moving one in front of the other down the hill, plowing down the hill, coming in saying, you are way too close to my area. I don't want you here. I don't want your company. And he's coming down the hill to tell you to leave. And I've had some crazy aggressive encounters where he will bugle 10 or 12 times coming down the hill into that setup. And we've had other occasions where the bull will still bugle, but he's a lot more timid in his bugle. Donnie's bull last year, he was bugling on his own 10 o'clock in the morning on August 30th with cows. And we coaxed him across the draw with cow calls, and he answered the cow calls pretty consistently, but it wasn't a fired up, like I want to fight you bugle. It was just a slower, more drawn out communication bugle. And we just kept coaching him in with the cow calls. He didn't come up the hill that morning, but that night we got back on him, got him to bugle again, worked in with the cow calls. Again, he was coming up, just slowly taking his time, probably, eating his way up the hill. But as he got within about 150 yards, I knew we were very limited on time. And so once he responded, I hammered him with a challenge bugle. And within about 90 seconds, he was in Donnie's shooting lane.
You make that sound so easy, Corey.
It's not easy, but if you can just imagine what the elk's thinking and try to trip his trigger, it takes a lot of the confusion and the frustration out of elk calling sometimes.
Yeah. Well, listening to you explain that scenario, knowing how aggressive you usually are, having to try follow you through the hills sometimes, when you said you got to be patient, that's a shift of gears for you. That's like downshifting. It's like locking in the hubs for you.
It is.
I might be able to keep up with you most of the time then on August 30th, but by September 10th, I'm just a boat anchor for you.
And it is, we definitely, the concept's the same. We're still trying to get that bull to fight. We're still trying to trip his trigger, but the way we approach it has to be different. He's not as fired up. He's not as vocal. If we bump him, if we mess that setup up, it might be 2 days before we find another bull that will talk to us. Whereas on September 15th, I have a lot more confidence that, hey, if we get aggressive here and mess this up, we'll go over the ridge and get another one to bugle, and we'll have another encounter. Yeah. During that early season, you do have to be more patient. You have to apply a little bit more finesse because you have to be a lot more efficient. You have to take advantage of those opportunities because in that week's hunt, we might only get 3 or 4 opportunities. And so we do have to be a lot more careful.
Huh. So I know everything is somewhat dependent upon the scenario, the landscape, the situation, but when you're finding elk in late August, early September, September 1st, 2nd, 3rd, whatever, are you finding them staged somewhere near the cows? Or is it just these habitual places where for whatever reason they go to this little knob and they just beat the heck out of those poor little spruce or pine trees for 2 weeks and they are there no matter what? Or is it somewhat dependent upon a proximity to the cows?
I think that they are staging themselves in an area that will allow them to go out in search of the cows, but I think it's more habitual. We find them at higher elevations where it's a little cooler. It's almost always on a north face bench where they like to bed down, either a bench or a nice flat spot on a ridge. Yep. And a lot of times, during elk season, you're walking along, and you're like, oh my goodness, this is the place. This is where the rut happens. There's 30 rubs right here. And you get all excited. but I rarely find rut rubs that are that concentrated. If I find 30 rubs that I can see within view of each other,
Yeah.
I mark that spot. And it's like, this is the bull's bedroom. I am coming here first week of September next year, and I will find a bull, and he'll answer me. And so I think it is more habitual where they go, they know the area, they know that they have food, water, security, everything there. And, it's probably in closer proximity to the cows than where they spent their summer, but I don't go looking for the cows during that early season.
Good to know, because I see these places when I'm out rifle hunting. I'll walk through a spot. I'm like, look at this. There's 12 rubs within 30 yards right here. And in my mind, I'm thinking I should be here September 15th. Really what you're saying is, no, Randy, you want to be there September 1st.
Yep, because by September 15th, when they go out in search of the cows and where they actually rut, it could be 10 miles away from there.
Wow.
Typically, it's not that far in, the mountain states, the Idaho, the Montana, the Wyomings. Typically, it's going to be within a mile or two of where the cows are. They're going to be staged there. But man, I've seen bulls completely vacate an area going in search of the cows, or going to where they know they've found the cows in the past. And it can be a long, long ways from where you find them in the summer.
Wow. Well, that's cool. I've never, I'll be honest with you, I view late August, early September, that's why you hunt mule deer and antelope, because it's too hot. So the amount of elk hunting that I've done on September 1st is really, really low, because grouse season opens everywhere on September 1st also. So I'm usually heavily distracted at that time, but that's really good stuff. I'm taking notes on that. Hopefully the listeners are too.
Well, and we'll put it to the test again this year. Last year, we only hunted those first 2 days of the season in Idaho, and then we got ready to head to Oregon. This year, we're switching it around, and we're going to hunt Idaho early and go to Oregon a little later for our Roosevelt hunt. So,
okay,
we've got some stuff we're looking forward to for sure.
So, when you go do the Roosevelts, will that be in the peak rut later in September?
Yeah, it'll be, I would say, before the peak rut.
Okay.
Where, the actual dates that we're going to be in Oregon are going to be about 5 or 6 days later than what we've went in the past. We're going to be hunting like the 10th through the 19th this year.
Okay.
And so, that's my favorite week to hunt elk. As far as Rocky Mountain elk. Yeah. And in talking to Shannon and Corey, with Angry Spike Productions, we're going to hunt with them again, as well as Dave Brinker, who, has spent his life hunting Roosevelt elk. The later in the season you can go, the better the calling action is going to be. I think the concern is the later in the season you go, the more moisture you can expect, the more rain. And I'm trying to time it here. I'm getting the most out of the calling action and avoiding as much rain as possible.
Roosevelt elk and rain. Yeah. I'm going in November for Roosevelt's, and everybody has told me, I hope that you bring your PFD and your dog paddling skills, because you're going to feel like a frog. Oh, well.
Yep. I was going to say that from what I've understood, August is really nice. First part of September is really nice. And then it turns into fall and winter weather, which is pretty much expect rain every day. And if it doesn't rain, it's wet enough from the rain the day before that you're going to get just as soaked all day.
Well, when you're out doing that, I'll be in Idaho chasing Rocky Mountain elk. So we'll see how that goes.
You're going to be hunting with Kurt, right? From Rocky Mountain Hunting Calls?
Yep. Yeah, we're going to grab some llamas and head on into the backcountry of Idaho. And we both have elk tags, but I like the grouse number limit in Idaho. So I can get an extra grouse every day there. So he'll probably call you after that hunt and say, "This guy's got problems, man. How do you hang out with him?" And you'll tell him, you'll say, "Well, that's why I quit hunting with him in September."
I need to send him the link to the video from when I hunted with you in Montana several years ago, and
Yeah.
I think if he watches that, he'll at least get an idea of how distracted you get when a grouse is sitting in front of us.
Yeah, he'll at least be slightly prepared anyhow. So then it won't be long, Corey. It'll be peak rut. Like peak rut. And I'm going to be in Wyoming then.
Man, that makes me a little jealous.
That's why I said that. I wanted to make you a little jealous.
You know, I say this completely taking full blame for it, but we did that hunt giveaway with Mountain Ops this year.
Yeah.
And the dates that it just happened to work out are the 24th through the 29th of September. So my peak rut experience this year will be in a phenomenal place in Utah with a whole bunch of elk, but I'll be carrying a bugle tube and not carrying a weapon. I'll be doing the calling for the winner of the hunt.
You'll be doing your civic duty.
Yep, that's right.
Yeah.
And the whole time thinking about you in Wyoming and the experiences I've had during that time frame in Wyoming during archery season.
Well, we'll see how it goes. I hope it goes well. You never know. Hopefully I don't get eaten by a grizzly bear, but there's, you see how many follow-up questions we got on the podcast that we did
Oh my goodness.
a while back about hunting in grizzly country? It almost